real quickly, how's everything going with the campaign there? Everything going smooth for you guys at the moment? I know it's interesting times with COVID going on.
It is an interesting time to be campaigning, but I think these moments also remind us that elections have consequences. And the issues that we're facing this week pull into sharp focus how much really is at stake, literally the soul of our country. And that's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate.
Definitely. What's your reaction as not only are you a reverend, a religious figure in our community, but you're also at a church that, you know, has always been a focal point of or a center point in the civil rights movement and protests and marches. The images you're seeing coming out of Minneapolis of the riots and the looting, a police precinct on fire, you know, well-established stores and businesses and people's livelihood on fire. What's your reaction just when you see those images coming out of Minneapolis right now?
Well, the image that's most striking for me is the knee of a police officer literally on the neck of a citizen, George Floyd, for almost 9 minutes. That is a striking image because of its physical impact. But in a real sense, it's also a metaphor, I think, for what a lot of people are feeling, the sense in which there are two legal systems, and one for Black people and one for white people. And those of us who are invested in the hope and the promise of America have to make certain that that's not true. And so that's why it's important for all of us to stand up in a moment like this and fight for what is so basic to the American covenant, and that is equal protection under the law. I think that the folks that you see responding in ways that certainly are regrettable and tragic are speaking out of a deep sense of despair and profound pain. Dr. King used to say that riots are the voice of the unheard. And somehow we've got to be able to say in our system to all of our citizens that we hear you and we are responding.
You know, a lot of those voices in Minneapolis, of course, what their voices were saying was that they want arrests and charges, and for this to play out in a courtroom with murder charges being the center of it. And I talked with Chief Erica Shields a short time ago. She said when she sees the video as a police chief, there was no reason for a delay in those arrests to take place and for those charges to come forward. She saw enough just in that video. And she said the citizens up there, she believes, if they had faith in the system, that they lost it with the delay. The police officer who's seen kneeling on top of Mr. Floyd in that video, I don't know if you've seen, he's just been arrested. Do you have any reaction to sort of the delay to get to the arrest, but the arrest finally taking place now?
Well, I would say it's about time. And we've seen this kind of thing happen over and over again. This morning, a CNN reporter, Omar Jimenez, who is a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, by the way, was arrested doing his job. The thing that the CNN reporter who was arrested in Minneapolis and the police officer who killed a citizen doing the opposite of his job, to protect citizens, the thing that those two people have in common is that tragically the skin that they were wearing seemed to be more consequential than any badges that they were wearing. And so it's about time that this officer would be arrested. He has a pattern apparently of this kind of abuse. And all of us have a stake in this. If people don't have a sense that the system is fair, they become more and more alienated from it and disconnected from it. And those of us who serve, who are in leadership, who serve in public office, who are running as I am for public office, have to make sure that all of our children feel like they have a stake in the American promise. And that's really what's at stake in a moment like this. And sadly, we haven't seen much leadership from Washington.
What, because of your personal connection with Omar, I don't know if you've talked with him or any of his family since this arrest, but just what's your reaction when you see that? I put myself in Omar's shoes. I've been at protests and marches before, and I've had that same conversation that he was having on camera with police of, let me know where you want me to stand. We want to work with you, but we want to cover this event as well. And thankfully, I've never been arrested in that situation, but Omar was, unfortunately. Have you had any conversations with him or his family, and or just what was your reaction when you saw that video of the arrest? And
Yeah, it was very painful to see. This is a family with deep roots in the Ebenezer Baptist Church. I spoke this morning with his grandmother, who was a part of our church, a lifelong member of Ebenezer. And she's from a different generation. She was a part, as it turns out, of the Atlanta student movement. I spoke a little while ago with his mother, who said to me that there he was standing next to another white colleague, and the police asked his colleague what he was doing. He said, I work with CNN. He said, fine. He asked Omar the same question, and you see the difference in the result. I mean, the contrast is so stark. It almost feels like a caricature of reality, but it in fact is reality. And that's the painful thing that we're dealing with. Omar is fighting the same fight that his grandmother, who was a part of the Atlanta student movement, was fighting more than 50 years ago. And this is the frustration and the deep pain that is expressing itself in a moment like this. And I think it's unfortunate, certainly, to see the property being destroyed. But if you are offended by that and not offended by the taking of a man's life, a citizen's life, in broad daylight, a slow and brutal execution on film, then I think one needs to re-examine your priorities. Both, in a real sense, are about lawlessness. We have this covenant, this sense that we are one people, that there is equal protection under the law. And when people see deep contrasts and contradictions in that promise, in a real sense, they are fighting against an act that they have seen that is both unlawful and unjust.
with the images we're seeing out of Minneapolis, obviously they're the epicenter, ground zero for the situation involving Mr. Floyd and his murder. But protests planned here in Atlanta for later today. We've seen similar protests in Atlanta in reaction to other killings elsewhere, and I assume the Black community here, that they feel that could very easily be them, and they have a strong connection to what happened elsewhere, and that's why they protest. That's why they march here, to have their voice heard as well. But quite often the protests here, they've remained peaceful, nonviolent, as peaceful as possible. Chief Shields says she credits the police department, but at the same time, you have to credit the protesters that they take a certain approach to keep that calm. What are your thoughts on sort of recent protests we've had here in Atlanta? There was large ones 4 or 5 years ago here, and they remain relatively peaceful. Why do you think that is?
I think that the sad and tragic thing is that we have to keep having protests in order to win what ought to already be ours. And that is the idea that we are human beings, that we are American citizens. That's really the tragic thing, that all the way from Sanford, Florida, with Trayvon Martin, a young man killed by a civilian who took upon himself, who arrogated to himself the power of the law, to Ahmaud Arbery. We saw the same thing in Brunswick, Georgia, to Michael Brown in Ferguson, and now the situation in Minneapolis. It's the same sad song, and somehow we've got to create some new music in America. And it's a tough moment, but I think people of hope and goodwill have gotten themselves together to rise up and respond to this kind of thing in the past, and we'll do it again. We can't afford to give up. There's too much at stake. I took a look this morning at my own 2 children. I have very small children. I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 1.5-year-old son. And the thing that you ask yourself is, am I going to have to teach the same lesson, have the same conversation with my son that my dad had to have with me and his dad had to have with him? And that's the thing that we've got to commit ourselves to bringing an end to. And it's hard to state how much really is at stake. This may feel like something that is happening to Black people, to people of color, and certainly it is in a particular kind of way. But what's really at stake is the soul of the country. And as the demographics of our country are changing, all of us have a deeper stake in making sure that all of our children are protected, all of our children are safe. Regardless of what side of town you grow up in, the zip code, all of us want to be able to go to work, go to school, jog down the street, and return home safe.
Definitely. Yeah, I can relate. I got a 7-month-old daughter myself, and I've struggled with conversations that perhaps I'll have to have with her one day. I will never know the struggle of a Black person. I'm white. I grew up in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, a very white community, but you know, my wife is from the Caribbean and she's West Indian descent, and she's told me of situations since we've been living together in America where she has, you know, been in a store with me and she feels that she's handled by customer service in a different way, and she feels racism at times in her life. And so I know as a mixed race household, my daughter's going to have questions and how to explain things to her, and it's a struggle as a father of a young daughter of how you will phrase things one day. It's just it's a terrible situation to be in for everyone. I know there's a lot of people, you know, in my family as well, of people who want to return to church, that with COVID going on, and then also what we see in the headlines now with these situations, that people need church in their lives. Before I let you go here, I need to ask, what's the plans for Ebenezer moving forward? I know you guys, your doors are staying closed for now, but you know, people need faith in their lives. What's the thought process moving forward?
These are very difficult times. People certainly need faith, and they need a connection to spirit. And so we continue to worship. We just worship online rather than on site. And it's difficult, especially when funerals emerge, when people die, because all of the things that we normally do to create comfort for us and the bereaved families, we're not able to do because of the virus. But we're clear that a funeral should not produce other funerals. We should not lose lives trying to celebrate a life. And we worship on site rather than online, because those of us who are entrusted with the care of souls have to be concerned about preserving the human body, which is itself a temple. So it's difficult, but what we're doing at Ebenezer is we're paying attention to the science and not the politics. We think that the politicians ought to be listening to the scientists and the medical experts, which is why we are not opening anytime soon. We'll keep monitoring the situation, and when it feels safer, we'll begin to make changes accordingly.
Definitely. And it's an odd time, unfortunately, for Ebenezer to have its doors closed because of this during, you know, a very big political season. I know Ebenezer's traditionally been a place where we've seen a lot of these politicians stop by to meet your community at church on Sundays, and, you know, share a little bit of their message and hear from the people at Ebenezer. So hopefully the science, you know, helps things improve so you guys can get your doors open again. But Reverend, I appreciate your time. Is there anything else on topic you feel like we haven't covered? Those were the questions I had for you.
No, I mean, we worship online. The doors are open, but our hands and our hearts are, the doors are closed, I should say, but our hands and our hearts are open. And the ministries of the church are robust, even at a time like this. We continue to feed the hungry and the homeless. We're providing groceries to seniors and other people who are food insecure. We've been passing out masks and hand sanitizer. In a real sense, that's what the church is all about. We enter to worship, but we depart to serve. We're worshiping online, but we're right on site, continuing to serve those who need it.
Definitely. Well, Reverend, stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll let you get back to your day there.
Thank you. All the best to you.
Thank you.